Hello, welcome to this channel. My name is Janet. I'm working through the King James's Bible, and today I am in the Book of Kings, the first book, working through chapters 16, 17 and 18. So if you're ready, we will get started. Now, this chapter covers a lot of changes within the kings on the northern side of the territory. Now, remember, the two sides of Israel are divided. We've got the Judah and the Benjamin tribe being reigned by Asa. He has been king for quite some time over them. But on the northern territory, we have Baasha. He's just become king. He has massacred Jeroboam's entire family. He takes over the reign, and we're going to find out now on this side of things what happens to the kings. So as we begin chapter 16, a prophet by the name of Jehu comes to Baasha and he tells him that because he'd sinned and he'd wiped out Jeroboam's entire family, that the same was going to happen to him and his family. He said that whoever belongs to Baasha, so whoever belongs in terms of link to his family ancestry, will either be eaten by the dogs and die in the city, or die in the fields and be eaten by the birds. And this was really a disgrace to not have a proper burial. So this is what the prophet Judah has given to Baasha. Now, throughout these chapters in Kings, we are referred often to the Book of Chronicles because not everything is listed on what happened. So it states here that Baasha's acts are written in the Book of Chronicles. So if you want to find out the exact details, you can go to that book. So Baasha then dies, and his son Elijah, he takes over and reigns over Israel. So the prophet Judah then comes again to meet with the son and tells him the same prophecy that he gave to his father, that your father has sinned, and because of this, the entire household was going to pay for what has been done. So we learn that it's the 26th year of reign for Asa over in the south side, while we're having a change of king here, who is Elah on the northern side. Now, Elah reigns as king for 2 years in Tisra, and his servant Zimri, who is the commander of his chariots, he conspires against his own king. He waits for him to get drunk in the place of Tisra, this house he goes to drink, and once he's drunk, he goes and he kills him. And then he takes over the reign as king. So this is the second king now to take place. So King Zimri decides to kill all of Baasha's family, the lot, and even any friends associated with them. He kills everyone. There's a total wipeout. So as the prophet predicted to Baasha, his entire family now have been killed. And if you want to learn about all of the acts of Elijah, again, it refers you back to the Book of Chronicles. So it's in the 27th reign of Asa on the southern side that we now have King Zimri, who has come into power by his violation of killing his own king. And because of this, he only reigns for 7 days. It's not a long reign as king, and this is what happens to him. So on Zimri's 7th day of reigning as king, the people of Gibbethon hear about this, and they're not happy. They don't want him as their king. So they decide to make king in their camp Omri. So he becomes the 3rd king of Israel by their decree. What they do then is they gather an army together and they go and besiege the city of Tisra to basically take over King Zimri, get rid of him, and that's what they set out to do. Now, as the city is becoming besieged, Zimri sees this and he runs to the citadel and he sets it on fire with himself in it. So he commits suicide. And again, we are told to go to the Book of Chronicles to look up all the acts of Zimri. Now, just as a side note here, suicide is actually classed as a sin by the Lord. It's noted in the book of John in chapter 10, verse 10. We hear that basically it's cowardice to commit suicide because you have listened to the lies and the deception of Satan. So we're now on to our 3rd king, King Omri, who has been chosen by the Israelites of Gibbethon. Now, Omri's original role was the commander of the army, so you can imagine he was quite a strong and bloodthirsty man. They usually are the leaders of the army because they're going out there and they're killing. So not all of the Israelites had chosen Omri as their king. There was still half of the Israelite tribe on the northern side that had chosen a different king. They had chosen Tibni over Omri. But as the film says, there can only be one in Highlander. I don't know if you've ever seen the Highlander movie, but yes, there can only be one. So the people behind Omri set to basically overrun the other king, and that's what they do. So we end up with the one king, Omri. So he didn't last very long, poor Timni. And all of this is going on while over on the southern side, Asa is now in his 31st year as king over Judah and Benjamin. Now Omri reigned over Israel for 12 years. He had 6 years in Tirzah, and then he built his own city on a mount, and he called it Samaria. Now it's noted that Omri was a wicked king in the eyes of the Lord, and he did worse than any of the other kings that had reigned before him. He's the 4th king, remember. And then again, if you want to learn the acts of him, go to the book of Chronicles, you will find all the information there. Now he dies in Samaria, and then his son Ahab, he takes over. So this is our 5th king in this one chapter today. And again, on the southern side, we've got Asa. It's his 38th reign as king over there, whilst we have the 5th king in place now here, Ahab. So Ahab reigned over Israel for 22 years in Samaria, and he unfortunately became worse than his father. So God had already said how bad his father was. Now this guy is even worse. He starts out his leadership by marrying a woman named Jezebel, and she is from Sidonia. So she's not from the Israelites' camp. And you know, God always says you should always marry within the Israelites, not go outside, which is what he's done. But he doesn't only do that, he starts worshipping the false god Baal. And he makes an altar to Baal right in Samaria so he can basically, you know, worship him. And he makes a wooden Asherah as well, which she is the goddess of like the tree of life, so he makes her. So he's making all of these fake gods, which is making God extremely angry. He's probably seething right now what Ahab is doing. Now, as we come to close this chapter, there is a couple of sentences which kind of go off track, you would think. And I was like, what's this all about? And it says this: Hiel of Bethel built Jericho, a foundation at the cost of his son Abiram, and the gates at the expense of Segub, his youngest son. Now, I had to look this up because I wasn't sure what this was to do with. And basically, if we go back to the book of Joshua, remember the city of Jericho was burnt down. They went round it. It was the first city, really, they took over as they crossed over the Jordan River. And it was there kind of left destroyed to show that, you know, they had arrived, and it's kind of like a shrine almost to God, showing that, you know, he has come here, he has delivered them into the promised land. Now, at that time, Joshua, who was leader of the Israelites, he made an oath with God to say that if anybody was to build this city again, that it would be at the cost, and I'll just read from the actual verse. So if you go to Joshua chapter 6, verse 26, you'll hear this: Cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. So that is why this last sentence is quite important. So whoever this new guy is, Hiel at Bethel, he is building up Jericho, and it's showing you how bad things have got under this new king Ahab, because the people there are just like going way beyond what is in the book of Moses, way beyond the commandments, the laws, and the statutes. So we close chapter 16, quite a grandiose chapter, with that statement. Okay, so we move on to something slightly different now in chapter 17. We go to the prophet Elijah, and he's telling King Ahab that there is going to be a drought, and that it'll only end at the Lord's saying. He's the only one that is going to be able to stop it. So he's left that information with Ahab. Then he's told by God to leave and to go to the brook of Kerith. And there he will have enough water, but he'll also be fed by the ravens, which they do. The ravens bring him food and he drinks from the water there. Now eventually that brook does dry up. Then God comes back to him and speaks to him and tells him to go to Sidon, where he'll meet a widow there, and she will basically feed and water him. So he sets off there and he sees this woman, this widow, carrying sticks, and he says to her, "Oh, please, can you get me some water?" So she heads off to get him it. But as she's going, he says, "Oh, and could you bring me a morsel of bread too?" And she says, "Well, the reason I'm carrying these sticks is we've only got flour and oil, me and my son, and I'm getting this to make something for us to eat before, everything runs out." And he said, "Look, I assure you everything will be well. I'm here with a message from God. Could you please first get me some bread, bake me some bread, and I assure you that flour and oil will not run out before the drought ends." So she does as he says. She goes, makes him some bread, and as he prophesied, they never run out of flour and oil. It keeps being enough there for them every day. Now later on, her son becomes quite sick. And she goes to Elijah the prophet and says, "Have you brought sin upon us? My son is sick. Now what?" And he takes the son upstairs to his room. And he goes up there and he prays to God to save this boy. And God does. He hears his voice. He saves this boy, brings life back into him. He then takes the boy downstairs to his mother, and she is elated. She says, "Now it proclaims that you are a true prophet of the Lord." And this closes our chapter 17. So in chapter 18, we go back with Elijah, and he's going back now. The Lord has instructed him to go back to King Ahab. And he tells him that he's going to send rain. Good news, right? So off he sets to go and speak to King Ahab. Now all the time he'd been away, Samaria, where King Ahab is, has been suffering from a great famine. And the king had requested to see his administrator, Obadiah. Now he tells him to go out into different lands and search for grass. That's what he's instructing him to do. And he says, "I'm going to go out too, and I'm going to search for grass." Now when Obadiah is out there, he sees the prophet Elijah, and he knows he's a prophet, so he bows down to him. And Elijah tells him, "I'm coming to see King Abijah. I've got a message for him." So Obadiah goes back to King Ahab and he tells him, "I've seen Elijah and he's got this message for you." Now when King Ahab sees Elijah, he says, "You are the one to blame for all of the mess that's going on in Israel right now. You've cursed, you've brought this on us." And Elijah says, "No, it's not me. It's your sinful ways, what you've done. You have followed these false gods and you're worshipping them. You're leading Israel down this track, and this is why you have the situation you have right now." So Elijah tells King Ahab to summon all of the people to Mount Carmel, along with all of their false idols. Elijah then goes there and meets all of these people, and he says, "Look, you can either worship Baal, that false god, or you can worship God, the Israelite God." And the people just stand there and they say nothing. Elijah then restores the altar there of God. So he gets 12 stones, and these represent each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He then gets a bull, and he cuts it up as a sacrifice to the Lord, and he has this ritual with the bull, with wood, and he asks the Israelites to pour water onto it. And then he asks God if he will bring a sign so that the people will know that he is there, to give them like this message. So God just does that. He burns the wood and the sacrifice just with flames, and that makes the people cry. They're like, "Oh!" And obviously, realize, "Oh, it's so true, our God, God of Israel." And so they're back on track with that. And they destroy all of the false prophets. So the Baal and the Asherah, the goddess of life, are all destroyed. Elijah then, at the top of the mount, says to his servant, "Look out at the sea." And the servant looks out the sea 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And then he sees a cloud, and the sky darkens, and the rain falls, ending the drought in Israel. And this closes our chapter 18 for today. So what a lot of transitions of kings in the northern side of Israel, and the demise that has gone on. It seems to have got worse and worse and worse, and we're at a really critical point with this King Ahab, who seems to be quite an evil king. Plus, we've heard a lot from the prophets. You know, they're bringing a lot of wisdom through God to the different people for them to listen, and it's whether they'll take notice or not. Some do, some don't. Obviously, the Israelites are listening right now as we've closed this chapter. They've got rid of the false gods. So we will see, because we've only got a few more chapters left now in this first book of Kings, what will happen next. So stay tuned. I'll be back again soon with the next installments of Kings Part 1. See you soon. Bye.